Hello and welcome to Global News Today, bringing you exclusive interviews with leading experts every weekday here on Al Arabiya News. I'm Tom Burges Watson. Coming up on today's programme, the US President Donald Trump suggests Ukraine was to blame for its invasion by Russia and the resulting war. President Zelensky accusing Trump of parroting Moscow's narrative, saying he lives in a Russian disinformation space. The Kremlin says that President Putin and President Trump could hold a face-to-face meeting before the end of February. And tests confirm that Pope Francis has pneumonia in both lungs. The 88-year-old pontiff remains at a Rome hospital. Hello and welcome to the programme. First, the US President Donald Trump appears to be suggesting that Ukraine is to blame for the war with Russia. Well, he made those comments at his Mar-a-Lago resort in Florida just hours after US and Russian officials met in Riyadh for their first round of talks. Well, Ukraine was not included at those talks. While seizing on complaints that Ukraine was denied a seat at the negotiating table, President Trump said that they could have made a deal sooner. Here's what he said.
Invited. Well, you've been there for 3 years. You should have ended it 3 years. You should have never started it. You could have made a deal. I could have made a deal for Ukraine that would have given them almost all of the land, everything, almost all of the land, and no people would have been killed, and no city would have been demolished, and not one dome would have been knocked down. But they chose not to do it that way. And President Biden, in all fairness, he doesn't have a clue. What he was so bad for this. He was so bad, so pathetic. It's so sad.
The US President speaking there. Well, for more analysis, we can speak now to Solomiia Bobrovska, who is a Ukrainian MP and deputy head of Ukraine's delegation to NATO, who joins us now from Kyiv. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. I just want to get your initial thoughts and your reaction to that statement from the US President, suggesting Ukraine should never have started the war and could have made a deal to prevent it. How do you respond to that?
You know, we started to have the joke in Ukraine. It's better to fall asleep earlier than to listen to Trump's comments in the interview, because when we get up and see what he said just couple hours ago, and it's nighttime in Ukraine, this time it was very disgusting. Ukrainians do not accept that, and our recommendation, and it remains to be, and it seems to be, as it happened, 10 years ago with the Minsk agreement, when someone started to make deal about Ukraine without Ukraine. That's the first very moment, and we will continue to push on that. And President Zelensky very clearly said that we do not recognize the negotiations that happened in the Emirates. That's the first, in Saudi Arabia, that's the first point. The second one, what President Trump said, that it was total Russian narratives, starting about the 4% of supporting Zelensky and finishing with the point about we have to explore every dollar which was sent to Ukraine. I think that they have to check their spendings within their system, budget system, because here in Ukraine we can count every artillery shot or bullet that we've got from US. I think it was too much with his comment. My recommendation for his administration, that's just to take the history book about the history of Ukraine and the history of Russians, and finally to understand the Ukrainian mentality. Because at the end of the time and all these negotiations, we are only just on the beginning of this way. Everything will be decided in Ukraine, on Ukrainian soil, with Ukrainians who showed their position on 24th of 22nd year, 2022. Because according to US perspective, we had to lose in 3 days and in 7 days. And that's what they pushed. And that's why they pushed to move Zelensky from Kyiv, government from Kyiv, MPs from Kyiv, that Kyiv has to fall. We are sorry, 3 years of the big, huge war, very painful for Ukraine, and we will still stand and continue to stand under the Ukrainian flag in Kyiv.
Okay, and you mentioned lots of points there, and just going back to what President Trump's been saying, this 4% approval rating for President Zelensky. I mean, I'm just wondering where he got that number from, because that's not what the opinion polls in Ukraine are saying, is it?
Absolutely. That's what I mentioned. Absolutely. That's a total Russian narratives. Russian narrative is 4%. Russian narrative is to demand elections. That Zelensky is not legal on his position, but he is. And no one in Ukraine is claims about the elections. Neither about presidential nor parliamentarian or local one. We all understand about the martial law, the procedures. We all understand that no one will go to Kharkiv or to Kherson, to observe the elections. And first of all, Americans won't go, for example. At least 57% Zelensky has the support. And what Trump said, that's a quite 100% of the Russian narrative. Today we have the special representative of Trump on Ukraine, Mr. Kellogg, and I hope he will bring back messages to Washington, D.C. Ukrainian position, clear understanding about the polls, and support of Zelensky, and all this bullshit which started from the Russian side, how to push their messages and press on Ukraine, how we should react or act or whatever, or obey US. That's not the way.
Yeah, you mentioned the US Special Envoy for Ukraine and Russia, Keith Kellogg. He's in Kyiv paying a visit. Just wondering what sort of messages, what sort of objectives, and what sort of achievements you want to come out of this visit?
I think I hope President Zelensky and his team will pass him messages with our peace plan, with our plans on the front line, with the very clear plans of Russians on the front line. And when Lavrov said that they are not attacking the Ukrainian civil energy and infrastructure, we just got two big, huge, for the last 2 nights, attacks on Mykolaiv and Odessa, which are on the Black Sea shore. Mykolaiv is totally out of heating and electricity. Odessa Children's Hospital was hit, plus energy infrastructure as well. And 200,000 people are without heat now when we have the 11 degrees below zero. I think all these points we will pass. We will show how they use the Northern Koreas, what's going on with their promising, with Russian promising, and all the stuff which is going on between Ukraine and Russia and so on. What can be compromised? What our demands are and our list of proposals are. And I think President Zelensky will back to his peace plan. Of course, about the withdrawing the troops. We understand that probably it's almost impossible. But no one, probably Kursk will be the one of the issues as well to discuss. Kursk operation and Kursk region, which is the territory part of it is under Ukrainian control, and so on and so on. I hope all these messages will be back to DC.
One message that is being sent back across the Atlantic towards Donald Trump from your president is that President Trump, he says, is living in a Russian disinformation space. Now, I'm just wondering here, given what you've told me and the situation on the battlefield looking extremely challenging, whether you think it's advisable, no matter what he said, for President Zelensky to be baiting the US president. What do you think?
I think our point is to show the truth, what's going on really, and not to accept Ukraine as it happened 3 years ago with Afghanistan. That's the 21st century. It's not the 15th. If they will be out, we will continue to fight for European support, artillery, ammunition, military support, military personnel as well. Why not? It changes a lot. And for the last month and a half, I think Europe has finally to wake up, and I hope they woke up and took out the pinky glasses that they lost the last 3 years of preparing what Russia can do. And actually, Russians said very clearly, and they sent the message, if Europe Europe won't sit as the force part of during the negotiations on Ukraine. They're not allowed to send our troops. Their troops here. They're not allowed to send our ammunition and so on and so on. We all have to keep the strong position, because at the end, as I told, Ukrainians as a nation will keep fighting. As Trump cannot decide instead of Ukrainian parliament how to change constitution. That's impossible. With all respect to Americans, what they did for the last 3 years.
We're not quite 1 month into this new Trump administration. I'm just wondering what his return to the White House has done to morale there in Ukraine.
You know, we had a really huge expectation before his inauguration, and even in the trenches, in army, I've heard a lot like, okay, Trump will come, everything will be done. We are waiting for the mobilization, and so on and so on. He will make Putin to free situation. He will help us to have a ceasefire or whatever. But but for the last almost months, Ukrainians are very, not to say even disappointed, but we are against of what he is doing and of what he's showing, because it shows that we are now -1 ally on the front. We can stuck, yes, with ammunition, and that again shows that we are alone on the ground, except Nordic, Baltic, plus UK, that who can really help us on a deal, but not with the words, And I would say people are frustrated. That's the same in army, in media, within journalistic this circle, civil society, so many different messages, but again, with the cold hat, we are saying, okay, it's just the beginning. We have to keep strong, just to wait, because the news are too fast. Each night, news, and we have to react. But maybe it's just informational noise.
That's something we're going to be talking about in a minute with one of our guests, trying to sort of decipher Trump's language here and what his technique is, what he's trying to achieve. One thing I just want to ask you about, we haven't got much time left, but Dr. Stephanie Babst, who is the former NATO Deputy Assistant Secretary General, spoke to us yesterday, and she seemed to be saying that President Trump has switched sides. I don't know what you think of that. Do you think people in Ukraine would largely agree with her?
You mean switch side with whom, or with that Europe has to take responsibility for the security?
Yeah, in the sense that he's turning his back on Europe, and he seems to be welcomed with open arms by the Russians. That seemed to be the essence of what she was saying.
But Europe knew that it can happen. They were afraid of that. They were afraid in the last summer. They understood that they could face this message and this position. And I was really not surprised, but I know that it was a big mess and frustration within the Munich security conference, when J.D. Vance said that no more you have the same values with the US and blah 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 blah. But it was quite expected to get this position, and we starting from the last year, Ukrainians on each meeting we said you have to take leadership. Please decide who can take this leadership. Germany, UK, France, who is among the leaders, who can be able to take leadership not only about Ukraine, but about your security in Europe. Because US will say no to you once upon a time. And they said very, very, very fast, in 25 days. I think as long as Musk will be there in the administration, and this chaotic vibes will go from him through the whole institutions. Maybe they can destroy the institutions. Well, I don't know. They are moving quite fast. That's what they were building for the 100 years in other countries, and in US started, to collapse. We will see.
Do you think Ukraine can consider the United States an ally still? Do you think Ukraine still trusts the United States?
We still believe in a bipartisan support, Congress, which is the main one of the main instruments that can influence. That's the first position. The second one, we still hope probably that Putin will show his real face to Trump, and Trump got nervous and will react. That's actually our expectation for now. And I think it's too early to set to put the mark whether U.S. is still ally. There is still Congress and Senate where we have more or less support. That's important, and we will see with time. 180 days Kellogg took as time, public time, to find the solution. I think this 6 months will show really a lot who is who and who is supporting whom and who is on whose side.
And just lastly, Solomiia, I just want to ask you why you think your president cancelled his visit to Saudi Arabia. He was supposed to go there. We understand he's now not going. Why do you think that is?
Yes. He's planning this visit at the beginning of the March, 10th of March, if I'm not mistaken. And he commented this. He doesn't recognize as a president any negotiations. He doesn't want to meet or to cross with the team of US or Russian team that's obviously, and he don't want to put this all together. All events together, so there is no sense to go now. It's better to do this in March.
Okay, well, we're going to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed for your time today, Solomiia Bobrovska, Ukrainian
Thank
MP.
you.
Thank you for your time. Well, President Trump's comments have sparked backlash on social media, with Sean Savett, who served as a spokesperson for the White House National Security Council under the former President Joe Biden, accusing Trump of fully accepting Putin's propaganda without question. He said that it sounded as though Trump had bought Putin's propaganda hook, line, and sinker. Well, according to Democrat Jake Oceancloss, Russia has now won round one, suggesting that the Kremlin had been brought back into the diplomatic fold, even though Ukraine and NATO were excluded. Meanwhile, President Trump's fellow Republican Senator Roger Wicker, chairman of the Senate Armed Forces Committee, agreed that President Putin couldn't be trusted in Ukraine talks. In an interview with CNN, he called him a war criminal.
Do you think that Putin can be trusted in these negotiations?
No. Putin is a war criminal and should be in jail for the rest of his life, if not executed.
Well, for more analysis, we can speak now to Sam Nunberg, former advisor to President Trump, who joins us now from Washington. Thank you so much for being with us. Just want to ask you whether you agree with this outreach by the Trump administration to Moscow. Is this advisable?
Yes, I think that the Trump administration and President Trump are wise to re-engage with Russia. Remember, Joe Biden, his predecessor, had not spoken to Vladimir Putin since 2017, warning Vladimir Putin not to invade Ukraine. Subsequently, what we've had is a major hostilities. The United States has armed Ukraine to the teeth. They've continued to arm them with more lethal weapons. And President Trump had long criticized not only Putin, which he had criticized during his time after leaving office, but the Biden administration. It's also well known within intelligence circles within the U.S. and allies within the U.K. Boris Johnson has said this publicly, that they do not believe Putin would have invaded Ukraine had President Trump won re-election in 2020. He has been handed a extremely unstable situation, and he is trying to bring a peaceful resolution to this. This would not be from what we hear so far within the negotiations and what Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth said in Europe, along the lines with J.D. Vance, this would be in line with what the American people voted for, frankly. President Trump said that he would end this war. Ending wars are not easy. There will be concessions on both sides. But I do feel if you look at President Trump's record in his first term, despite the way he was categorized and maliciously defamed as a Russian stooge, Vladimir Putin was in a much worse situation during his term, his 45th, well, he was the 45th president, as opposed to where he is now.
In terms of those concessions on both sides, I mean, it looks as though President Trump has granted some concessions to Russia before the talks have even got started. I mean, you might not agree with this, so do tell me if you don't. But for example, he said that it looks very unlikely that 20% of Ukrainian territory under Russian control will ever come back under Ukrainian control. He's talked about NATO membership for Ukraine pretty much being ruled out. Has President Trump got any concessions, to your knowledge, in return for the concessions he's already made?
Well, first off, from what we are learning now and from what has been told to allies of the administration, hostilities right now, at least Russia's advances into Ukraine, have been paused. He has been able to have the front line, obviously, less hot. And we have also learned that that not only have hostages been released, which they were last week through Steve Witkoff, we have learned that Vladimir Putin has met with Witkoff for 3 hours, which is one of the reasons why, and I was surprised to see him at the negotiations with the Russians, along with Secretary of State Rubio and National Security Advisor Mike Waltz. Now, remember, these are two, Rubio and Waltz are two, what we would call hawks. They have said things along the lines that Putin is a thug. But they have also been critical of Vladimir Zelensky and the handling of the war from the Biden administration. I would also note that it is simply unsustainable for the U.S. to continue to arm Ukraine to fight a war where they are not making any advances. It is much easier for the U.S. allies such as Britain, France, and Germany to say we will continue arming Ukraine and Ukraine should fight to the death. But that's what Ukraine is doing. They're fighting to the death. Now, in terms of other concessions, we'll see. I'm not so sure I would call it a concession to say that Ukraine is not going to get back territory that it's lost. Because behind the scenes, I wonder what France, Britain, and Germany really thought. Remember, we have been told throughout the years that Ukraine was making this major offensive, that Ukraine would gain territories, and frankly, along that border, it's tragic. But you look at those cities are in rubble. So it doesn't mean to say that Russia is at a good place. I would also note that President Trump on Truth Social was quite critical of Vladimir Putin. President Trump was critical of Putin's decision once he was elected to invade Ukraine. But he's looking to end this and to have re-engagement with Russia. And that's a larger discussion. The more and more that the United States isolates Russia, what we have seen is Russia goes and becomes its strongest ally becomes China. That ultimately is not in U.S. interest, and that is a major switch from Russia on Russia's position. So ultimately, in terms of world stability, which is what President Trump wants, I think that this is the best course, personally, and I agree with what is said. Now, remember, what is said publicly in diplomacy is not necessarily what will ultimately be the final resolutions. But this idea of not entering negotiations with Russia, re-engaging with them. Remember, once again, as I said, Biden has not even spoken to Vladimir Putin since 2017. You do have to enter negotiations on some friendly terms here, and the idea that we can allow Ukraine to enter NATO while they're losing the war is just unfeasible for the United States. And frankly, we would be doing a favor, in my judgment, to our European allies.
Yeah, I just want to ask you, because, I mean, it seems you're quite solicited when it comes to trying to decode and decrypt President Trump. And you know, we heard him saying last night at Mar-a-Lago that Ukraine should never have started this war, and it could have made a deal 3 years ago. And you know, he's been quite disparaging about the Ukrainian leader, saying he's lagging in the polls with 4%, which, by the way, isn't at all what the latest polls are showing in Ukraine, because we've just spoken to a Ukrainian MP. Mm-hmm. But what's he trying to achieve there? What's the point of doing that with all of this diplomatic activity happening in parallel?
You know, I long remember, as we know in history, that when FDR met with Stalin, he was quite dismissive of Winston Churchill, because this is a way that I think President Trump is trying to show Vladimir Putin that he is not going to listen to Zelensky, in terms of Zelensky is not directing U.S. policy. Zelensky had criticized. He gave an interview in the United States on Meet the Press, which is a Sunday network show that is the most prominent show, most important show. President Trump had previously given an interview after he was elected, and he said he won't agree to any negotiations. He won't agree to the plan or whatever that the United States negotiates directly with Russia. So what I would say is that Donald Trump is trying to show that he holds the cards, he holds the leverage over Zelensky, and to show Putin that when he's telling Putin, look, I can negotiate a resolution to this. You're going to have to make concessions on your side, which they ultimately will. He's not going to take a bad deal. He's trying to show that, you know, he's the one in charge here, and that Vladimir Zelensky doesn't speak for the United States here. And the United States will be able to push through any agreement that it comes to with Russia.
Just lastly, I mean, what do you make of the first month of the Trump presidency in terms of the overtures that have been made on the diplomatic scene, in terms of the techniques and the tactics that have been employed when it comes to negotiating? What's been your assessment?
Well, the United States has had a lot of successes. I do like him completely reversing course on the Iranian sanctions. He signed an executive order. And while that's another thing I would say, while he gives lip service to saying that he would like to find a peaceful resolution with Iran, I don't believe that President Trump believes that there will ultimately be a peaceful resolution. You've seen him push Netanyahu, despite Netanyahu's political position domestically, to accept a hostage deal. Whether I support that or not, that is certainly something that his predecessor was unable to do. On the other hand, you have seen him also put pressure on Palestinian leadership and to talk about some kind of reframework into the Gaza issue. Now, what I ultimately see is that Donald Trump understands that he has only 4 years here. He understands exactly the situation that he's inherited. And I would say that that's a different situation, frankly, from 2017. I'm quite pleased to see that President Trump, as he said during his campaign, that he knows the ways of Washington and diplomacy now. I'm quite pleased to see that that, in fact, is true. You know, he simply was a novice in 2017, and now he is a seasoned president. So what I do believe is that we will see big changes going on, including in the Middle East. I believe that Saudi Arabia, in short course, will ultimately come to some public agreement to open relations with Israel, not to say they don't already have relations with Israel. And vis-a-vis NATO, you're going to see him continuing to put pressure on Germany, France, and Britain to get to at least that 2% domestic spending on defense, which I don't believe all three of them did, despite their assurances to President Trump 6 years ago.
Okay, well, we're going to have to leave it there. We're out of time. But thank you very much indeed for your time today, Sam Nunberg. Thank you.
Thank you.
Of more, we can speak now to John Herbst, the former US ambassador to Ukraine. Thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us, Ambassador. A lot has been said and a lot has been done in the last 24 hours. Just want to pick up on the comments that President Trump made last night at Mar-a-Lago about Ukraine and the Ukrainian president. How do you think they're likely to have gone down with your former host country?
Well, I think they're disappointed in the start of negotiations in Riyadh with just Russia and the United States in attendance. And I think the fact that Zelensky expressed some disappointment in that set off President Trump, and we've seen President Trump get set off before. But I call this principally a tempest in a teapot, not more.
Do you agree, though, with the principle of the Trump administration and their decision to end years of isolation and start engagement with Moscow? Do you think that is the right way to go?
I think the following. Trump has laid out a plan that could work to achieve a durable peace. That concept includes two requirements for compromise by Ukraine relating to territory occupied by Russia, relating to possibly joining NATO. Sorry about that. And Zelensky has said he's willing to look at compromise, at least on land. The concept also includes 2 points where Russia must compromise. They must accept that to deter future Russian aggression, Ukraine will be substantially armed by the United States and its allies and partners. And they must accept a demilitarized zone with European troops in between, European peace enforcers. Moscow has rejected those 2 conditions. In order to persuade Moscow to negotiate seriously, I think Trump got it right in the first week as president in the second term when he said he needs to put pressure on Moscow. I think that holding a meeting in Riyadh where you're talking about not just ending Moscow's aggression in Ukraine, but also broadening the U.S.-Russia agenda is not the smart way to get Putin to negotiate seriously.
Yeah, because there are allies of the United States and allies of Ukraine's that are concerned that President Trump might be willing to give up too much for too little. I mean, from what you're saying, it doesn't sound like you're overly concerned about that.
Well, again, I've just said it's not the best way to achieve it. The right way to achieve it is, like Trump said back 4 weeks ago, to put maximum pressure on Moscow economically. And Vance, Vice President Vance, last week said, yes, economic pressure, maybe even military elements are required. So that is the right way to do it. But I mean, Trump is president. He will pursue his own way. And we've seen a comparable approach when he reached out to Kim Jong-il in his first term.
Right, and did that bear fruit? I mean, was that the right way to go?
No, it did not. But it also did not lead to a bad deal. Trump walked away because he realized he was not going to get what he needed. The key is this. Trump wants a deal quickly. Doing it the way they did it in Riyadh is not going to hasten a good deal. It'll slow it down.
Right, so you're saying that a brand new administration, it's not even been a month since they took office, some quite new negotiators at that table in Riyadh yesterday on the American side, and yet veterans on the other side of the table. Just to get some clarity here, are you saying that perhaps they should have held off a little bit before getting started with those talks?
No, what I'm saying is that they should have kept the focus simply on peace, on reaching a peace deal, because Russia would like to normalize relations with the United States. Russia is saying no to the 2 elements in Trump's own proposals, which could achieve a durable peace. So the way to get Russia to move towards accepting those proposals is not by widening the agenda, which is something Putin wants. It's by putting pressure on Moscow to negotiate. That's what I'm saying.
Okay, and all the while, you've got Europe, NATO, Ukraine feeling extremely sidelined. I mean, are they justified in feeling sidelined here?
I understand the feeling. It's not the way I would conduct American diplomacy, but I think that they shouldn't make too much of it because Rubio and other officials have said when it comes down to talking about peace, Ukraine will be at the table and Europe will be factored in. And Europe has to have a serious role because Trump is asking them to play a very serious role, putting their troops into a demilitarized zone between Russian and Ukrainian forces.
Yeah, I mean, some are blaming Europe for not having a clear collective position, and that is one of the reasons why they haven't been as involved as they might be. I mean, do you think perhaps they are, we've seen a flurry of activity in Paris and in other cities in Europe in the last week or so. I mean, do you think they are, for lack of a better word, getting their act together?
I have been impressed by the attention now senior European leaders are paying to the concept of European peacekeepers deployed to Ukraine. That has been the most positive development towards peace over the past week.
Yeah, and the EU feels extremely invested because they have sent $52 billion US worth of weaponry since the invasion began. And if I'm not mistaken, that matches what the US has given. I mean, they clearly have skin in the game.
They have a good deal of skin in the game. They have given more assistance overall than the United States. That's all true. And I think that's understood.
Okay, if Kyiv refuses to accept a deal that's been struck by President Donald Trump, and at the moment we're hearing, some pretty acrimonious exchanges between Mar-a-Lago and Kyiv. Can they just fight on and do so without US support? And do you think the European Union and EU, European allies can fill the void left by the US?
Look, the rhetoric regarding what's happened over the past 7 days is far greater than circumstances warrant. There has been, as best as I can tell, no serious discussion between the Russian and American negotiators in Riyadh regarding the actual terms of a peace deal. What we got was kind of a roadmap on things to discuss and the ways to discuss them. That's not unimportant, but it's not the peace deal itself. I don't have any doubt that Ukraine will be at the table when they're hammering out the specific elements under which either a ceasefire or a broader peace deal is achieved.
And just lastly, I mean, Europe's got one lever at its disposal, which is that 200 billion euros of Russian central bank assets that are frozen in the EU. I mean, can Europe use that money to its advantage in terms of getting its voice heard? There's
no doubt about it. But if you're familiar with the issue of the Russian frozen assets, which are principally but not entirely in Europe, you know that the countries that have worked the hardest to get the original deal done to send $50 billion to Ukraine last year were the United States, Canada, and Britain. Germany was a laggard, France was a laggard, Italy was a laggard, and Japan too. It would be very smart if those four countries agreed with the Brits, the Canadians, and the Americans to transfer the remaining, I don't know, I've heard it maybe as much as 300 billion. 50 has already headed to Ukraine, to get that to Ukraine. With that, Ukraine can buy American weapons, European weapons, and also maintain its economy to the extent it enables it to conduct this war. That would be a very good thing for Europe to do, especially, again, those four countries, or the three European countries and Japan, which have not stepped up on this issue.
OK, well, I mean, Tom, we're out of time, but I'd love to talk to you for longer. Thank you very much, though, meanwhile, John Herbst, former US ambassador to Ukraine. Thanks for your time today. Well, what began as a telephone call in mid-February could now turn into a face-to-face meeting. Well, the Russian President Vladimir Putin and the US President Donald Trump could be set to meet before the end of this month. Well, that would mark the first in-person encounter between a Russian and a US leader since 2021. Well, President Trump himself has confirmed this. Well, both presidents have made waves this week. First, there was their telephone conversation. Then, with the US-Russia talks in Saudi Arabia, at which Ukraine did not participate. Well, for Ukraine, its European allies and NATO, it may feel as though the tables have turned, with Trump seemingly upending his traditional alliances. Well, President Trump's goal of ending the war in Ukraine has stoked fears of a peace deal with President Putin that could undermine Kyiv and Europe's security and alter the geopolitical landscape. Well, Brett Bruen, a former foreign policy advisor in the Obama administration, has expressed his concern that in just a matter of days, President Trump has turned Russia from being, quote, a pariah to a potential partner. Well, for more, we can speak now to Tobias Ellwood, the former UK Defence Minister and former chair of the UK Parliamentary Defence Committee. Thank you very much indeed for joining us, Mr. Ellwood. Your Twitter feed raises the question, has President Trump switched sides? And you've suggested as well that there's something much bigger happening here. I just want to ask you, first of all, what do you think is happening here?
Well, we simply don't know, because we've seen America enjoy a conference in the desert with Riyadh, but we're not sure. Everybody's been kept out of it, so we don't know what's being discussed. And what America is doing, what Trump has succeeded, is bringing back our arch enemy, rehabilitating President Putin back onto the international stage. Don't forget, this is an individual that's led his country to war, conducted war crimes, is wanted by the international criminal courts. And yet here we see the leader of the West then courting him, having discussions behind the scenes, which we don't know what has been discussed, and actually then parroting the very words that President Putin has been using, including who started this war. And this made me, and I felt a bit disloyal when I put that tweet out, but it made me pose that very question. I was born in New York. I'm half American. I work very closely with our American allies. From a British perspective, the United States is our most important security ally. We rub shoulders on the, in the diplomatic corridors, on the factory floors where we make equipment together, and usually on the battlefields. And yet here we have Donald Trump moving in a direction and moving so fast that it's difficult to keep up. And as I said in my tweet as well, perhaps it's time just to slow down, take stock, a more measured approach, allow the back channels to operate, because clearly President Putin will be delighted to hear that his actual messaging, the words and phrases that he's using, are now being used by the President of the United States of America.
Yeah, let's just talk about some of those back channels and what you think is most likely to be happening in the corridors of power in London and in Washington. I mean, what does Washington need to hear, do you think, from traditional, solid allies like the United Kingdom?
Well, there's a couple of things. There's firstly the operational. There's no doubt about it. We can't do anything in Ukraine to move this on without the American push and the might, and that's clear. When Donald Trump was elected, everybody knew that this would be somehow game-changing. It would shake things up a bit. But nobody anticipated the Munich Security Conference, where we actually saw announcements that America would dial back from its general presence in Europe, that it would play no part in the long-term support of Ukraine, and it would also veto any NATO involvement. And again, President Putin must be delighted from this perspective. So the first message is to say, look, what's happening in Ukraine won't stay in Ukraine if Putin gets his way. It will spread further across Europe. And secondly, America backing away from its security interests in Europe will have a long-term consequence on the United States. What we need to see is us able to contain what Russia is doing, and therefore be able to then help America with this wider geopolitical challenge of the rise of China. But if we're subsumed, if we're distracted by Russia, that's going to continue its advance, as Putin is now the most powerful leader in Europe, then that means we will not be able to support the United States in any way. And if the European economy, of course, starts to go down, that itself will have a knock-on impact on the American economy too. So there's this wider geopolitical picture of Trump, America, recognizing that we work best when we work together, given the challenges that are coming over the hill.
And given the relationship that the UK has got with the United States, I mean, do you think we're hearing the right kind of language and the kind of straight talking that perhaps is needed from the British Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer?
Yes, that's always been the case. This special relationship that's spoken of is about us being able to whisper, in the ears of those in the White House to say, let's try this instead of that. Why don't you pursue this angle, not that? And we've been very, very good at it. But with this president, who's very much all about fortress America, I want to say America, make America great again, but actually to build America up at the cost of anybody else, including Europe. And that was the message I got attending the Munich Security Conference, was that America's relationship with Europe is now very much more contractual. It's gone are the historical bonds of friendships and as an ally, but more simply as a mutual convenience. If it benefits America, they'll pursue it. If not, then they will withdraw. And like I say, and as your question implies, we need to try and advance that conversation to persuade Donald Trump that actually the depth of the relationship is absolutely critical, given the complexities, the challenges that our world now faces as our global order starts to deteriorate increasingly in the following years.
Yeah, just picking up on what you were saying there about what was said at Munich, and I'm just wanted to ask you on the spur of the moment, what went through your mind, just in a couple of words, if you will, when you heard J.D. Vance's speech there?
Well, one bit really puzzled me because I represented Bournemouth for 20 years, and the abortion clinic that he mentioned is in my patch. And this was to do with an individual that based himself outside the abortion clinic for an hour and a half. The police begged him to ask him to move on because there was already a dispersion order because of problems around the clinic. He refused to go. And yet, how did that incident end up being mentioned by the vice president of the United States at the Munich Security Conference, when everybody in the audience was wanting to hear where America would go with Gaza, what America would do with Syria, what America is going to do with Ukraine? Instead, we had this grand tour of complaining about lack of openness and transparency, lack of sharing of information and freedoms and so forth. It was a bizarre statement, not the way you go around, winning friends and gaining influence.
So is bizarre the word you would use to characterize that speech?
Yes, completely. But as I say, they're used to saying things, and we've come to terms with the fact that Donald Trump does do things differently, and that's his style. But ultimately, you then need the people behind the scenes to pick these up. We need a peace deal in Europe, but that doesn't give away terrain to Ukraine to allow Putin to rearm, regroup, and do it all over again. Otherwise, there is a 1938 to the world now. The other word that went around, or the feeling at Munich, was appeasement. Absolutely, that we were doing a deal with the bully. The bully was able to walk away, able to claim a form of victory. And as I say, it won't stop in Ukraine. And it will be even better for Putin simply because America has then backed away, retreated from its interests in Europe. So Europe is now a very much more unstable, uncertain place to be right now.
Yeah, and you say Europe is on its own in your tweet. I just want to put something else to you. Boris Johnson, of course, well known on the international stage as being something of a Trump whisperer, and we understand that they have a good rapport, the two men. Boris Johnson says that President Trump's comments aren't supposed to be taken at face value. Rather, he says, they're there to shock Europeans into action. Is that technique working? And do you agree with Boris Johnson's assessment?
I don't agree with that style. The message was clear, and I've actually been confirming what Donald Trump has said. Every single NATO country, particularly in the west of Europe, needs to spend more on defense. Our world is getting more dangerous, not less. And Donald Trump has said that, annoyed, frustrated that America has picked up so much of the bill. But to get us to do that, there are various ways. And what they're achieving now is to say, I don't even care how much you spend in order because I'm out of here. I'm backing away. And that thing in Ukraine, I'm quite content to allow Putin to claim a form of victory, to actually, and prevent even NATO from providing security for the very country that we've been trying to support for the last 3 years. So this isn't just about trying to dissect and understand the curiosities of what Donald Trump says. These are dangerous policies that are forming right now. And we're only in the first couple of months of this presidency. Where does this all go? I'm afraid we're seeing bigger picture is a fragmentation of our world order. And at the same time, Russia, China, and Iran are actually advancing a rival, an alternative vision as to where our world should go. And many nations across the world, particularly in the global south and in the Middle East too, are choosing to lean to the east instead of to the west. And that's a very dangerous place to be indeed for all of us.
All right, well, thank you for your analysis. We really appreciate your time. Tobias Ellwood, former UK Defence Minister, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
And finally, Pope Francis has been diagnosed with pneumonia in both lungs. The 88-year-old pontiff was admitted to hospital on Friday, where he underwent a CT scan and a chest X-ray. Well, his condition has been described as complex, and he remains closely monitored at a Rome hospital. Well, doctors have prescribed additional medication to aid his recovery. Well, despite his health challenges, Pope Francis has expressed gratitude to well-wishers and asked for prayers. Well, Christians around the world are uniting in hope for his swift recovery. Well, that is all we have time for on Global News today. Thank you very much indeed for watching. Be sure to join us again tomorrow for more exclusive interviews. Until then, goodbye.